What's going on? What's going on? This is episode 3. That's what's going on. And we're doing Followers of the Way again. If you're confused as to what this is, this series, there's going to be an explanation down below. That was what you could call the foundational episode that explains everything as we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do with this thing. Now, this is episode 3. This is Fisherman's Tales. I really had a lot of fun on this one with Michael and Aaron. We also read aloud some text from the Gospel of Mark. For the readings, we read the entire Gospel of Mark, and we also did the readings that Aaron's about to read aloud from the website. If you don't want to listen to Aaron, if you just want to read by yourself, the link to the readings can be found down below. If you want to skip straight through the discussion, you can go to the timestamps and find when that is. I think it's about 25 minutes into it. And for now, I would say enjoy this episode. If you would like to join the next one, it's already coming up tomorrow, 6:45 p.m. Central European Time. That is Sunday, December 28th. The readings for that you can also find down below. The live stream is already planned so you can see it. It's going to be Galatians, James, and the readings on the website. I'm going to upload as an audio file just after this one, so keep a lookout for that on the channel. For now, I hope you enjoy this episode. Bye bye.
Chapter 3 A Fisherman's Tales. From the Sea of Galilee to Rome in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Introducing the Gospel of Mark. This is how they remember him in Rome, as a Galilean fisherman in his 40s. Simeon Cephas, the Rock, was the name Jesus had given him. Along the way, his name changed to the Greek Simon Peter, although he found that a bit strange because his Greek was mediocre and he didn't speak Latin at all. He had a young man with him, the nephew of Joseph Barnabas. In Jerusalem, he is called Yochanan, John to his Greek-speaking friends. In Rome, they call him Marcus. Peter visits Jews who heard about Jesus when they were in Jerusalem on business and visiting the temple. Now he seeks them out, and they invite friends and family to hear the traveler from Jerusalem. Some of them know Jesus' sayings. Peter recounts the anecdotes, and Mark translates them into Greek. He can recite many of the stories by heart, although you never know what twist Peter will give them tonight for this particular group of people. Sometimes when Peter struggles to find the right words, Mark finishes his sentences for him. He is like a son to me, Peter would say. The politics of the 40s. When Caligula was unexpectedly murdered on January 24th in the year 41 AD, his friend Agrippa, a grandson of Herod the Great, pushed the stuttering Claudius onto the stage, where the soldiers cheered Caligula's uncle as the new emperor. The grateful Claudius made Agrippa king of all Israel. Agrippa no longer called himself after Herod, as he was also a grandson of the last Jewish queen from a glorious line of priest kings. His coin bears the inscription, quote, "The Great King Agrippa," unquote. The book of Acts tells us how the new king wanted to please the Jewish leaders by beheading the apostle James, i.e., the brother of John. Peter was also arrested, but he escaped in a miraculous way and was hidden by the family of John Mark. As soon as possible, they sent him to the coast. From there, he must have traveled on, at least until Agrippa died in the year 44, and Judea became a Roman province again. Perhaps Peter traveled to Rome via Antioch. Both cities would later claim him as their bishop, although that term meant something different in the first century than it did later. Perhaps the young Marcus left his mother Mary and went with Peter on his adventure. Because of his gift for languages, they said. A church father writes that Peter arrived in Rome in the second year of Claudius. A Roman historian writes that a few years later, Claudius banished the necessary Jews from the city because of a dispute over a certain Christos, which sounds suspiciously like Christ and was pronounced the same at the time. According to the book of Acts, some of them came to Corinth, a bilingual Roman colony in Greece, just as Paul arrived there around the year 49. Is it striking how many greetings are exchanged between Rome and Corinth in Romans 16. It is striking. Could this be true? In any case, some of Jesus' followers in Corinth in the 50s are proud to be of Peter. They've heard the gospel from him, and some have been baptized by him. They even call him by his Aramaic name, Cephas. Fish tales. The Gospels are full of stories that only a Galilean fisherman could truly understand. Someone like Mendel Nun, who became a fisherman at the age of 21 as an immigrant in Kibbutz Ein Gef on the Sea of Galilee. In 1939, he learned from Arab fishermen how to fish in a traditional way, using mirror nets, drag nets, and the cast nets. They caught sardines, mullets, and barbel. When Mendelssohn became an archaeologist, he discovered a wealth of information in the fishermen's Latin of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. If you listen to their stories and question them with the knowledge of a traditional fisherman and archaeologist. The nets. They hadn't caught anything at all, Lucas said. But Jesus said, "Cast the nets on the other side of the boat." Then the nets were full of fish. Some translate this as, quote, "cast the net," unquote. But that is not a good translation in this specific instance, we learn from Mendelssohn. Fishermen lowered the nets, double mirrored nets that formed a wall around a school of fish. You chased the fish from the middle, and they got caught in the double net. He had seen them. Such an enormous school of fish seeking the relative warmth of the spring water flowing in Tabqa, just outside Capernaum, in the winter cold. The miracle was not that the nets were so full, but that the boys had caught nothing at all that time, until that landlubber was the first to see the school of fish. It felt as if God was telling them that, quote, miracle, unquote, that they should follow Jesus and, as Jesus said, become fishers of men. The pillow. Towards evening, the boat crossed the lake. "Let's go too," said Jesus. But when the storm arose, he was asleep on the cushion, says Mark. On the other side, Jesus stepped out of the boat and found the man possessed by unclean spirits. Jesus drove them out, and a herd of pigs ran down the hillside into the water. It was not a Jewish area. "Did you have a cushion with you in the boat?" you ask. Mendelssohn replies, "Jesus was sleeping on the balancing cushion," as Arab fishermen still call it, a bag filled with sand that we used to keep the boat level in the water. It often storms in the evening on the lake, briefly but violently. But why did the boats go out at night? You want to know? They left at night to be in time for the sardines spawning on the sandbanks at Wadi Samach, which is the biggest catch of the year. Their larger barbel also came there to hunt the sardines. In early spring, they caught so much fish that salters could sell the salted fish as far away as Rome. They fished with dragnets hundreds of meters long. The landlubbers went along to pull the nets from the shore, I should say. There, near the graves outside the village of Kursi, lived the possessed man. The piers of Capernaum. It was spring, Marcus says, after John the Baptist was beheaded by Herod Antipas. "We gathered on the other side of the lake and ate bread and fish in the green grass. It was around Easter," John specifies. They wanted to make Jesus king, but he refused. He walked away. "We sailed back to Capernaum without him," Marcus continues. "It was already night. The wind grew stronger and stronger, the waves higher and higher. The light of the moon and the stars was obscured. We rowed as if our lives depended on it, but we hardly made any headway. Then he stood there in the middle of the water, but he did not walk straight toward us. It seemed more as if he was walking past us toward a point ahead of the bow. 'A ghost is walking on the water,' someone cried. There was shouting and panic. Then he said, 'Stay calm, it is I. Do not be afraid.' Peter had stepped overboard, says Matthew, but he had no faith and would have drowned if Jesus had not grabbed his hand. Mark is enthusiastic. Jesus came aboard and the wind died down. We wanted to take him aboard, John corrects him. We wanted to take him aboard, John corrects him. But then we noticed that we had already arrived in Capernaum. Luke is silent about it. The piers of Capernaum jutted straight out into the lake, says Mendelssohn. The boat could have been wrecked in that storm. Is that why Jesus couldn't walk straight into the boat? It doesn't matter, says Matthew. The story of the boat in the storm is the story of our people today. The naked fisherman. John tells that they were fishing and saw a man standing on the shore of the lake. "Cast your net on the other side," he called. There was a school of fish. "It is the Lord," someone cried. Peter wrapped his cloak around himself and jumped into the water. Why did he put on his outer garment, you ask? Won't it get wet? Don't you mean that he pulled up his coat when he stepped overboard? Some modern translators interpret it that way. Surely that must be what he meant. No, he was naked, writes John. And the fisherman nods. Weights attached to the edge of the net cause it to descend like a parachute over a school of fish, explains Mendelssohn. He had found countless weights around the lake. One fisherman, Peter, had to dive down to the bottom each time to close the net from below. And yes, you did that naked, but they would never go ashore naked. The point is that Peter did not want to wait until the boat came ashore to meet his Lord. He preferred wet clothes. John Mark. The puzzle of Mark's life is difficult to piece together. We only have a few pieces, and even those pieces are uncertain. In the letters of Paul and Peter, we encounter the name Marcus in the story of the 60s. In 1 Peter, the writer calls Mark "my son," and Mark sends greeting to the followers of Jesus in Asia Minor. He is referred to as Paul's, quote, co-worker, unquote, and, quote, Barnabas' cousin, unquote, in the letters to Philemon and Colossians. His journey to Colossae in Asia Minor is announced there. In 2 Timothy, he is asked to be brought from Ephesus to Paul and Luke in Rome. In the book of Acts, John Mark, a Jewish and Roman name, is the son of Mary, the wealthy woman in Jerusalem where church gathered when Peter was released from prison in the early 40s. Luke recounts that around the time, the young Mark was taken by Barnabas and Paul to Antioch and then to Cyprus a few years later. A few years later, he visited the island again with Barnabas. After that, the sources are silent. Later church fathers report that Mark was in Rome with Peter in the year 42, which would have been immediately after his first visit to Cyprus, and left for Alexandria around the year 49. In the year 62, he is said to have been succeeded as, quote, bishop, unquote, by Anianus. It is also said that he returned around 68 and died a martyr's death. Tradition is divided as to whether he wrote his gospel before or after his visit to Alexandria. Morton Smith, a prominent Bible scholar, even claimed to have found an ancient source from Alexandria that mentioned a secret, longer version of the gospel according to Mark. But others believe that Smith, who has since died, invented this source himself. The Gospel according to Mark. Scholars say that we cannot say with certainty whether Marcus wrote this Gospel, and that is true. The names of the evangelists were added later, and the story does not seem to have taken its current form all at once. While part of it, such as the Passion narrative, took shape in the 40s, it was not put on paper in 2 or more editions until the 50s and the 60s. But we can see that these stories go back to the Aramaic stories of Galilean fishermen. They took shape in Greek as proverbs and anecdotes. We also know that few people were educated enough to write them down in Greek and turn them into a coherent whole. We are looking for someone from the 2nd generation who converted the Aramaic of the fishermen into the Greek of new followers of Jesus around the Mediterranean. He or she does not need to have been there themselves, but must have had the knowledge, credibility, and language skills to write this story in such a way that other followers of Jesus could adopt it. We are looking for someone who, when thinking of Simon of Cyrene, who carried Jesus' cross, does not think of someone from the distant past, but of the father of Alexander and Rufus, whom his first readers also know, possibly the Rufus we encounter with his mother in Rome in the 50s. An international family with Jewish, Greek, and Roman names, in which our writer feels at home. We are looking for someone like John Mark. The narrator. Mark has a smooth pen. He knows how to string together loose anecdotes like sandwich fillings, and he is not afraid to leave material out. As the director Alfred Hitchcock said in 1966, making a film means first of all to tell a story. That story can be an improbable one, but it should never be banal. It must be dramatic and human. What is drama after all but life with the dull bits cut out? If you're not a fisherman, if you don't know when the fish gather and the sardines spawn, when the grass turns green and when winter falls, then you might think that Marcus' entire story covers only a few months. But anyone familiar with the seasons knows that after John's arrest, it takes another 2 years before Jesus is crucified. Read it through in one go, or listen to someone read it aloud in a vivid way. Some people have staged Marcus as a play, without changing the text. The story has a natural form. There is hopeful but confusing beginning with John the Baptist, a Christ in the middle, and an ending in which Jesus is crucified. The turning point of the story is the transfiguration of Jesus in the mountains near Caesarea Philippi, when he is furthest from Jerusalem and is struggling with his calling. "You are my beloved child," God's voice says. Jesus thus recognized 3 times as God's Son: at his baptism, there in the mountains of Caesarea Philippi, and at his death, but the last time from the mouth of the centurion who saw him breathe his last breath. Mark thus sets the tone for the later account of Jesus. His 3-part structure forms the heart of the 5-part structures of Matthew and Luke. They add the birth and resurrection stories. They also weave a large number of Jesus' sayings into Mark's stories. The first Gospel. Most researchers assume that the Gospel according to Mark is our oldest Gospel, and that it took its current form around the year 70, after which it was used by Matthew and Luke, among others. It is questionable whether there were earlier versions, and therefore multiple authors. Luke may have based his work on a shorter version than Matthew. At the same time, there are biblical scholars who point out that many of the stories themselves took shape in Aramaic in the 40s. Entire passages still breathe the stories of fishermen. Jesus' oral teachings did not necessarily have to be written down. The expectations of the end times are described with the image of Caligula, a, quote, lawless abomination, unquote, in mind, and not yet from the realization that the temple had already been destroyed. Listen also to what he says about spirits. For Mark, these are not ghosts, but mainly diseases and sick thoughts that control people and move through the air. That is the Aramaic way of looking at things. They took into account the danger of contagion, which the Greeks did not believe in. Marcus became the base for Matthew and Luke to write their stories. While they removed errors from Marcus' not always smooth Greek, caused by the underlying Aramaic. They also deleted his reference to, quote, Herodians, unquote, which no longer played a role in Israel at the time. Note about the Herodians: this political group argued that Antipas, the son of Herod, who at the time ruled only over Galilee, should rule over all Israel by the grace of God. On his coins, he already called himself Herod. The Herodian movement lost its relevance after his banishment in the year 39. King Agrippa, who ruled until the year 44, had older royal blood and did not call himself Herod on his coins. He called himself Agrippa the Great King. End of note. Shock and horror. This gospel is also early in theological terms. The question of the suffering of the Anointed One is still painfully raised. There is also a constant tension in the story between Jesus as a human being and as the Son of God. Jesus is the Son of God without any mention of a virgin birth. In fact, in Mark 3, his mother and brother say that he is out of his mind when he comes home late for dinner again. It is a gospel without the risen Lord appearing, without a mission command, and without the ascension. The bewildered woman who come to embalm his body hear only these words, quote, "Do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, as he told you." Unquote. They hurried out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Later versions sought to improve this abrupt ending, and given the passage of time, perhaps they had to. But I think it is wonderful that some manuscripts have preserved the first version. The first readers and listeners are still referred here to the witnesses who are still alive. Go to Galilee, look for them, talk to them. Let them tell you about their experiences with the living Lord. Then you will understand how the gospel was read to Mark in the first decades after Jesus' death. Not in place of living memories or passed down saying, but as the framework in which those memories, individual memories, took on even more meaning. You don't have to read Mark as the direct account of an eyewitness, but it was written and read in the presence of people who had already heard about Jesus before he was crucified. Realize that Jesus' impact on them was so great that they could share such stories about him with each other. For readers today, like us, that ancient ending may be an invitation to go back to the beginning of the gospel, to Jesus in Galilee, and to hear his words anew in the light of the resurrection. Then you read the story with different eyes. From the retrospective of the resurrection, you meet him as he is now. Summary: A Fisherman's Tale, 40s, 50s, and 60s, Christian era. After Caligula's death, the new emperor Claudius made his Jewish friend Agrippa king of all Israel. Agrippa then persecuted the followers of Jesus. Peter is said to have fled to Rome in the year 42, accompanied by the multilingual teenager John Mark, who would later travel around Asia Minor and Alexandria. Mark is said to have translated Peter's fishing stories into Greek, and perhaps also into Latin. Later, Jews were expelled from Rome because of trouble surrounding a certain Chrestus, and we encounter followers of Peter in Corinth. Someone like Mark may have begun to put those fishing stories on paper so that people could continue to share them even without Peter. The Gospel of Mark is the oldest continuous Gospel story, but it does not yet include the Christmas story or the resurrection stories. It ends with the empty tomb on Easter morning. Many separate stories and the Passion narrative took shape in the 40s, and the whole was read aloud in one or two editions at church meetings in the 50s or 60s. We find unique details in it that go back directly to Galilean fishermen like Peter. We hear about Jesus' questions, his family's resistance, and the disciples' lack of understanding. The turning point comes in the mountains of Lebanon, when he is fled because of the beheading of John the Baptist. There, in the dead of night, Peter and John, among others, see him talking with Moses and Elijah. It is a mystical experience that puts him back on the road to Jerusalem, where he will convert the rulers with the same message of God's kingship. He increasingly accepts that he will die in Jerusalem as the Passover lamb of the new covenant. This gospel is primarily about the question of who Jesus is as a human being and as the Son of God. A bit of background information. Did Jesus really exist? The problem is that virtually everything we know about Jesus comes to us in the words of his followers, who also saw him as the Savior sent by God. Theologians and historians therefore distinguish between the historical Jesus and the proclaimed Jesus. The proclaimed Jesus, the Son of God, the Messiah, can only be known through faith. The historical Jesus, the man from Nazareth, is the human life that can be reconstructed on the basis of historical research, regardless of the beliefs of the historian. Miracles and the physical resurrection belong to the proclaimed Jesus. By definition, they fall outside the scope of research into the historical Jesus. However, a reputation as a miraculous healer and the testimonies of resurrection experiences by us followers do belong there. There are two ways of conducting historical research. The first, historical critical research, goes back from the sources, especially the first three Gospels, to Jesus. What can we say with a reasonable degree of certainty that he said and did? And then, of course, you give priority to things that the evangelists say that do not fit in with their agenda or that of the early church. That criterion, by definition, produces a distorted picture. And if you are strict, you are left with very little, because what can you really know for sure? According to E.P. Sanders, in his book, The Historical Figure of Jesus from 1993, historians agree on the following. Jesus was born during the time of Herod and grew up in Nazareth. He was baptized by John, gathered disciples, and preached the, quote, kingdom of God, unquote, in the villages of Galilee. And around the year 30, he went to Jerusalem at Easter, caused a commotion in the temple, celebrated the last meal with his disciples, and was arrested. He was interrogated by the high priest and then crucified on the orders of the Roman governor Pilate. His disciples initially fled, but later experienced him as alive and concluded that he would return as king. In anticipation of this, they formed a community that proclaimed him as God's anointed one. The second method, which I use in my Psychological Analyses and the Historical Jesus, a book from 2011, works the other way around. What kind of historical Jesus do you need to explain his impact on the sources, especially the oldest letters? This approach uses a historically and critically tested core, but supplements it with less certain elements until a satisfactory and credible explanation emerges for what we can observe in the narrators and translators. A good explanation explains what we read in their writings with as few assumptions from outside the source as possible. There are also questions you can ask yourself while reading the New Testament. What impact do you think Jesus had on the people who told about him and translated his message? What kind of person do you imagine Jesus to be in order to explain that impact on them?
I just listened to the readings through Aaron's voice, and I did the Gospel of Mark this weekend, and I watched The Passion.
The Passion? Like, you mean the
Mel Gibson movie?
Mel Gibson movie?
The show. Oh, wow.
That's completely different.
I haven't finished it, but
that.
actually, it takes a lot of direct lines from the Gospel of Mark, I found out.
Yeah.
Like, directly, like, scene by scene. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So I'm going through that, and then I'm watching The Chosen on Aaron's recommendation. So
I gotta start that.
It's sick. You can watch it through the website, and there's
it's free. Like, they're Christians, so they're like, here, take it, please, watch it.
They're all for that.
Yeah, it's fun how that works.
So anyway, is it cool if I start the stream, or do we need to say anything else?
Yeah, and then I have it open just to make sure that it starts.
Yeah, so it's going to be a different link though. So the one that you have open, just check my channel.
Oh, okay.
I think
it the one chapter 3 fishtails?
Oh, yeah.
So that one I messed up, and it should be a new one that starts.
Yeah, I see.
Now.
Oh, have you? It? I see. Yes, I see it. I'm there. Yeah, okay. I already sent the message.
I see it.
Okay. I hope it works. Apologies, people at home, if they're listening. They might not be listening because I'm going to re-record it, but if you're listening right now, the original stream was through MOBA, so I had to create a new one. I hope people find their way. Maybe I'll put something in the chat of the old one, actually, or if one of you has it open at the moment, just to say there's a new one on the channel. But yeah, this is chapter 3. It's Fishtails. We read the Gospel of Mark. Check. Did you do the readings, guys? Of course you did.
Oh, Michael didn't finish it.
Oh, Michael. gotta read that Gospel, man.
Yeah.
I loved it when my professors did this. Like, who did the readings? And like one person puts their hand up. Or who didn't do the readings, and also only one person puts their hand up. So there's a bit of.
And then you make sure you're like you get in like fourth in line, so you have enough material to just kind of fumble fuck your way through it.
Yeah, I've done some terrible things.
So we're only going to talk through Mark 9:38. It sounds like.
Yeah, that sounds good with me.
Well, the thing is that I was thinking about that beforehand. Obviously, the many important aspects of the story will return when we're reading through the other Gospels. So it's not, let's say, a disaster if we don't get to, let's say, the end of Mark. But I do think we should get something what's distinctive of Mark, and I think you can find that earlier. And if you like, by the way, like I looked at some of the discussion questions. So what I did, tell me if you like that idea. I looked up some passages where you can divide up the reading for 3 people, as one portraying the voice of Jesus, one portraying the voice of usually his disciples.
We all know who Jesus is going to be.
Well, I think it should
Mr.
be Michael.
Yes. Come on.
That's
my guy took imitating Christ to a whole nother level.
Yes, exactly. And then there's one narrator, and I think that would just be good to not just do that for those viewing, but also
whoever is doing Jesus, well, let's say Michael, you really reflect on what it's like to say these things from Jesus' perspective, and then one of us who's doing the disciples really reflect on what it's like for the disciples to feel the way the words you're feeling, so we can get into those heads. Like, that might be later during this recording, but I think that could be a fun exercise if you're into it.
I'm into it.
Okay, nice. But maybe we should start off with the chapter that Bas van Os wrote.
Yeah, it was nice, man. I really liked it.
Yeah, tell us about it, Lucas. What did you like about it? Or what was in it? What was it about?
Well, the title is Fish Tales.
Fisherman's Tales.
Oh, whoops. Let me change the title. I think it's the title of this book.
Fish Tales.
Fish Tales.
Shark Tales.
Movie?
Dude,
Yeah.
I've just been indoctrinated by Shark Tales. Let's be real. I'll fix that post.
That's good.
That's fine. What is it about? Well, the readings that are aligned with it is the Gospel of Mark. So it speaks a bit about Mark. It speaks about who could have written this, what kind of person that has to have been. It speaks about the fact that you can, like, fishermen who have actual knowledge of fishing at that time in that cultural context would read this text in a different way than the average person just reading the gospel would. I thought that was really cool, and that I think he mentioned an archaeologist that kind of got acquainted with the fishing of that time or that place. Like, probably he went to modern day, I don't know, Capernaum, Galilee, whatever, and I got acquainted with that style of fishing, and it starts to show you some specific elements of the text that you wouldn't really understand without that context. So the way the nets are not cast but lowered is an example.
And I think that also that also lends some credibility to the idea that these were very, very much alive oral traditions, because if, let's say, these were far more general stories that were just like, oh yeah, and then Jesus went there, etc., but it has certain details that really speak to it, like, well, obviously this was still being told by the fishermen who were present then, like Peter, the disciple. So yeah, I think that's also a relevant point. But go on.
Well, Gigi, my cat is like literally, she's sprinting through the room back and forth, making a lot. You don't hear the noise, right? You don't hear anything?
No.
That's the beauty of this little microphone here. It catches only my voice. As soon as it turns around, it's gone. No, it speaks a bit more about the context. Caligula dying, for example. The way that the Gospel of Mark is written, his writing style, which I thought was really fun to kind of hear. Like, I love that my dad, so the writer of the website thing, he can see, like, oh, he chooses a specific literary style. He chooses to leave certain parts of the story out. He speaks of the drama of the story. The way that Mark writes, he can understand that. I will never do that unless I learn the language in which it was written and actually read those manuscripts. That's really cool. Also speaks about historical ways of basically the way we have done academic work on Jesus, the way we understand him as a historical figure, but also as the, I don't know, the other one, what it would be described as.
Portrayed Jesus?
Portrayed Jesus, I think.
Or was it like...
he named it. And I think he makes an argument that even though historically in academia, a lot of people wouldn't speak of the resurrection or the miracles from the perspective of history, like they would kind of not touch that. I think he was making an argument.
Proclaimed Jesus, by the way. Sorry, not portrayed.
Proclaimed. He was making an argument that actually the resurrection and the miracles should also and can also be addressed with the tools of historical analysis, and that there's actually really good basis for doing that, which is very rational thing to do from a historical perspective. To get a relative degree of certainty on some of the things that happened. What I also really liked, and then I'll really shut up, guys. is the way that he says the Aramaics, the people, the followers of Jesus at the time, understood spirits not as ghosts, but as disease, but also as bad thoughts. So when we often think of demon possession, they didn't consider it like, oh, there's an entity with some specific will, and like, look, that person is demon possessed. Like it jumped to that person. It's much more in a way that I think we modern people can understand it much better. It's disease and it's bad thoughts, basically bad energy. You could understand it as.
But it is disease and bad thoughts, let's say, being nonetheless overtaken by something as opposed to something being, let's say, merely inside you, if that makes sense. It's almost like something comes over you and takes hold of you, if that makes sense.
Yes. I also think it blurs the lines a bit between who and who isn't possessed by something. I think we all are to a certain degree. And I think he also mentions that the Greeks didn't believe in disease being... Ooh, I got to be very precise here. Maybe you have the quote.
No, I think it's the other way around, that the Greeks didn't think of spirits as being diseases, right? Or did I...
Yes. Well, okay. I won't elaborate. This is not a wise thing to do. Anything to add, guys?
I'm just looking at that section, which is actually just before this subsection that I want to talk about. But yeah, like just directly from the from the document, pretty much says exactly what you said, Lucas. For Mark, these are not ghosts, but mainly diseases and sick thoughts that control people and move through the air. That is the Aramaic way of looking at things. They took into account the danger of contagion, which the Greeks did not believe in.
Exactly.
There we go. Contagion.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking for.
But
That's great.
the other thing that I thought was interesting about this this reading that kind of calls back to something, I think it was last time that you mentioned, Aaron, about the way people reacted to the resurrection, and how a lot of kind of modern people talk about, like, you know, like the awe, the kind of awestruckness of people, and kind of the wonderment. And there was definitely that, but you were like, I'd imagine people were also like terrified and shocked, you know? And there's a section like shock and horror where he talks about that, where, you know, people upon seeing the risen Jesus, like, hurried out and fled from the tomb, for terror. Well, it says for terror and amazement had seized them. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Like, and I think that's important to think about, and to not kind of be, I guess, like, absorbed in the you know, the now kind of worship quality, and the amazement, and the, like, you know, the like I can't believe this, the like sensationalized aspect of it. And, like, you know, the people on the ground were like, you know, I wonder what they, in light of what we just said about how people think about spirits and ghosts being like kind of this thing that is a sickness, how people thought of that in light of seeing the risen Jesus. Like, were they like, oh, like, is this gonna like come and like destroy us? Or, you know, like, what did they make of that? Was it just completely positive from the outset?
And no, I think that's good. So, like, it does seem like there's continuation from what we discussed before, and confirmation. It should also be, I should say, it's charitable, because I noticed that I was critical of the word amazing, but it is the word that is used also at least in the New International Version. By the way, Lucas, your stream, you should probably check it. Like, we're on there, but very small screen.
Sorry.
No problem.
What we have the recording for.
yeah, exactly. But no, I think what so like, if you look at the the New International Version at least, like the word amazing shows up 13 times, which is quite a lot, or they were amazed or something like that, which is quite a lot because it's not a very long gospel, and it's just constantly emphasized. Like I felt like this was the word that kept returning to, like they were amazed, but kind of in this sense, like, you know, they were in shock, and for sure, like at the end as well. And I was listening to I want to get back, by the way, to some things I noticed about the chapter, but just briefly, that there's also an irony about the amazement at the end that you were talking about just now, Michael, that I was listening to Bart Ehrman and why he likes the Gospel of Mark so much. And one of the reasons is that that there's this constant shushing of Jesus whenever he performs a miracle, like don't tell anyone, and then they keep telling people.
Yes.
And then at the end, like there's finally an angel that says like, go tell everyone, and then the women are like, well, we're not telling anyone. You know, it's like a reversal almost. So it's very, it's just kind of funny. Like it's almost like Mark is playing a little joke, but also saying something that's relevant about the way in which this story is revealing itself. Some other things that I noticed, or at least like that I want to mention about the chapters, like obviously at the start that there were many like, even though the error and the terror of I should say the terror of Caligula had faded, we now have this new Agrippa who is also persecuting, leading Peter to travel to Rome, and he does so with indeed this figure called John Mark, who, by the way, is, at least to me, he's like a little bit elusive. Like I don't properly understand what to make of him, really, because he also seems to have been this I don't know, this associate of Paul's. So Paul also mentions him in his letters. So I'm curious to, like, just to give a little teaser, I guess, for what's to come. Like, when there's going to be a conflict between Peter and Paul, what kind of role this John Mark figure plays in there, or if that's like after or not related to it at all.
Yep.
And indeed, it is really fascinating that Peter says that he refers to, like in his letter, like so in First Peter, if you read it, that he calls him his son, which seems like there's such an intimacy that even though indeed this was not written down by, let's say, the disciples themselves, that nonetheless it is interesting that the earliest version was written down by someone who was so intimate with Peter, you know, like, it was like a pretty big deal, I would say, in the whole story. And in general, like, I just think, I don't know, I was reading it up again, and I always get very emotional when we read through the story of Peter denying his association with Jesus, and then obviously the cockroach, and like going 3 times, and he's sad about it. Not the cockroach, the cock. So I don't know, like I thought that was very moving, and definitely the humanity of it is coming through a little bit more. Also reading, and I should also shut up soon, reading the David Bentley Hart translation, I did a little bit, and it's just fascinating because David Bentley Hart is wary of people who, and I think, let's say, our dad is that as well, wary of people who place theological interpretations into translations. So David Bentley Hart stays so close to the Greek that you can actually see how awkward Mark's Greek is. So I'll just read some sentences out loud in English. And it's fine, like you can understand it, but it's just interesting to get a sense of it. So, this is a sentence structure. So this is what's up.
That's my cat.
You okay?
Pull down my
That's
camera.
the cat. Yeah, I think so. This is chapter 1, and then I'm looking at verse 30, and this is the David Bentley Hart translation. Simon's mother-in-law was laid out, stricken with fever, and immediately they tell him about her. And approaching, he raised her up, taking hold of her hand, and the fever left her, and she waited on them. And evening coming on, after the sun had set, they brought to him all who were ailing and those possessed by demons. And the whole city was assembled at the door. And he healed many who were ailing with various diseases. And he exorcised many demons, and did not allow the demons to speak, because they recognized him. And rising very early in the morning in the darkness, he went out and departed to a desert place, and prayed there. And Simon, so it kind of keeps going like that, like, and this, and that, and then they do this, and then they do this, and then they do this. Like, it's almost like this very vernacular kind of style, which I thought was kind of just interesting. So those were some aspects that I noticed, and I'm down to discuss any aspect that stood out to you. Lucas is still struggling to fix things. So at least one thing that I do want to do is read through those passages if that seems interesting to you, so we can get a sense. But I also think that the discussion questions are really worthwhile to look at. But maybe you have more things to say about the chapter before we go into some of the discussion questions about it.
Yeah, let me look. Let me pull up the discussion questions right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that was interesting. Just you reading that and listening to it, it kind of reminded me of like when you're a kid and you're like first learning how to write stories, and it's like, and then this, and then this,
yeah, exactly.
Like you haven't learned how to use like commas in a sentence to like you like join thoughts. It's just like and. But it, like we were talking before we got online about the difference between the synoptic gospels and John, for example. And I haven't read Luke and Matthew, but just my impression of Mark is it does feel very conversational. And even the dialogue from Jesus, it's like whatever kind of prefaces that or whatever comes after that, it feels like it nests it in this very I don't know, how would you say, like it feels like a journalist who was there, who was like recounting the events. And John feels a little bit more elevated in a way. I don't know if you can put more meat on that bone, but it feels more like a prophet who is kind of disclosing the holiness of Jesus. And I mean, it's not like the dialogue of Jesus speaks for itself, but it feels like Mark isn't doing any window dressing either. He's kind of just like laying out the story in a very plain way.
Yeah. Although, like, I do agree. Like, especially if you compare it to, let's say, the Gospel of John, like that feels so patterned and also the most theological of all Gospels. So, like, it has all these aspects. It's obviously the latest of all Gospels, and it is very different. Whereas here, it's much more conversational, and I even know that, like, I really like the Gospel of John, but for instance, I know that Dave Bentley Hart is sometimes annoyed. I'm not sure if annoyed is the right word, but he is frustrated by the fact that you find a lot less human Jesus in the Gospel of John, and much less someone who seems to be concerned about the suffering of the people around him. And you get that here for sure, that there is this Jesus who's like more concerned, and you get that probably even more in Luke when we get to it. So I definitely also thought that was interesting. And nonetheless, there are some patterns in the Gospel of Mark. Like, I think the Bible Project always does a good job of showing this. But like at the start, like there is this the sentence, the beginning of the good tidings of Jesus the Anointed, Son of God, and like so it starts off with proclaiming he is the Son of God, but then later on it's only proclaimed to him when he's baptized by John the Baptist, and then later on it's told to the disciples during the Transfiguration. But no one else says it really about him very directly until the centurion, all the way at the end, who says like, "Well, this must be the Son of a God after all." So he's kind of like revealed for the first time to, or like say, to an outsider who is not God, who is not Jesus, who is not the narrator, but someone in that time who was a Gentile, like, and not even a Gentile, let's say, just a Roman centurion. So there's definitely some patterns that he's playing with, that he's dividing it up into three parts. And he wants to say something about the moment he's revealed for the first time is to non-Jews and non-Christians. It's actually to a Roman who seems to be the enemy, right? Like, everyone expects the Messiah to be this warlord who is going to combat the Roman Empire. So all of that is just super interesting. And I also heard at least a discussion because we can discuss how many times in, like at least a couple of times um, in the Gospel of Mark. Oh yeah, that's one thing. If you haven't read until the end, there is this. I'm not sure if you heard about this, but well, it's actually written, I think, in the chapter that my dad wrote. There's this end that seems to be missing, and they added it on top of the very abrupt ending because that's the section you read out, which was about shock and horror. That is just like they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid, and that's just the end, which is just crazy because you expect to hear a little bit more about the resurrection, about what happened afterwards, but it just stops there. Yeah. That's the end of the book, and they now at least like they don't know. It might still be that the ending was lost. But nonetheless, it seems to end there for the earliest gospel, which I actually thought, I remember the first time hearing it, I actually thought was concerning. I was like, oh, they made up the resurrection story later on, etc. like all of that. Yeah. But then obviously if you reread Mark, then you see that Jesus is actually saying it multiple times. Like, oh yeah, by the way, what will happen is that the Son of Man, like he'll die and after 3 days he'll get resurrected. So the allusion to the resurrection is constantly there. And the resurrection does sort of happen because the women are at the tomb, but you don't see him come back. Like there's no encounter with him anymore. But I think, and that's like my question, if we're talking about the proclaimed Jesus versus the historical Jesus, I am honestly super curious if Jesus himself did say that he was going to come back after 3 days, or if that's something that he had to learn, let's say, throughout, or if he only found out after he died, if that makes sense. So I think there's all these questions, because now, again, there's discussion questions about, do we see character development in Jesus, or do we see a stable character, which is more, let's say, common for these traditional types of storytelling. And very stably, he's saying, this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen. Very little character development, but it might be that we nonetheless could think about the historical Jesus and see some character development. So I think there's many different ways of going at this, honestly, that is interesting.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting philosophical question because in the first section of the discussion group talks about the hero's journey structure and how the Gospel of Mark kind of patterns that. And I wonder, Lucas, if with your knowledge of ancient Egypt, and stories from there, I wonder if the hero's journey can really be traced back to the Christ story, or if a similar pattern existed even prior to that. But I think an interesting philosophical question is like, can we really look at the story of Jesus? Because I think there's definitely a case to be made that, like, the whole hero's journey pattern really does follow the life of Christ, where you have like, the leaving, like the young person, and you can think of like a modern allegory being the Lord of the Rings, like leaving the Shire, then encountering the demons and the monsters, and like taking up arms, and like the fall and the resurrection, redemption and stuff. But I wonder if you can really look at the story of Jesus that way if the hero knows the ending from the beginning. Yeah. Because I think an integral part of a compelling story and a compelling narrative is, the hero has an idea of what their mission is, or what their goal is, or what their calling is, say from God. But they don't, the fact that they don't know, and the fact that there is that mystery, is what makes overcoming it, like, and encountering it, that much more impressive, right? And so, I think then it really depends on how you view Jesus. If you view him, as like the kind of Jesus that's portrayed in John, that's like the very kind of holy Jesus that, knows his fate and declares it to the 12 at the Last Supper that he's going to rise again. Or do you look at it as, the Son of God, and like, someone who, is tempted and still is without sin, but like is tempted and like does actually have to overcome that his own humanness and his own frailty and like the and like the ultimate sacrificial death. Because I don't know, I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if it is as compelling of a narrative, if like he can. I mean, it's obviously not taking away at all from like the brutality and like the like just the ultimate sacrifice on the cross, but it's like if that death is going to be for the sins of all man
Mm-hmm.
already, as opposed to I don't know, like uh Bilbo and Frodo leaving the Shire and having no idea if they're
Mm-hmm.
actually going to be able to
Yeah.
complete the mission and like deliver the ring. Like which story as a human reader are you going to gravitate more
Yeah.
towards? I don't
Have you?
know, especially having like non-Christians on the stream, or people who are kind of wrestling with all of this, like um thinking about how they would encounter this story.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Have you read any Cormac McCarthy? Like like some of his.
I've read The Road.
Okay, yeah.
Just
So
I read it recently.
I've not read that book honestly, but like
Hmm.
I at least started at some point on what's the very famous. It's not the
Blood Meridian.
Blood Meridian. That's the one. And I remember reading the introduction from I think a friend of the authors who describes that Cormac McCarthy is far more influenced by let's say the Old Testament as well as the Odyssey from Homer in the way that he describes characters, because very similarly, and you see some of this obviously still in the New Testament, that there's very little descriptions of internal states. Lucas, I can
Mm.
still sometimes see your chat GPT and
Oh,
etc.
you
like
saw
all
my
of
whole
that.
ChatGPT thing?
Yeah.
Nice.
So
Exposed.
everyone who is like watching along at the
Yeah,
stream,
well,
yeah,
that's all good because no
I
one's watching. But Michael asked about the Egyptian story. There
yeah,
is a
yeah, yeah.
hero's journey.
One second. Can I
Yeah,
finish this
go.
thought, and then
Yeah, yeah.
like so I just want to say that that is a I think it's interesting to ask yourself if there, because I think there are, but I nonetheless think it's a great question. Like, are there heroes' journeys in the Old Testament? Are there heroes' journeys in the Odyssey? Because they don't describe, let's say, indeed the internal character of an Achilles. Like, wow, he was so surprised and
Yeah.
he was so doubtful about this, etc. So you're right. Like, you don't have that Sam Frodo kind of narrative, but nonetheless, you definitely have adventures. And I think something
Hmm.
similar is here, that you don't really get a lot of, let's say, Jesus's thoughts, but you do see the events, and you kind of have to, I don't know, You have to try a little bit harder, but I think it's there. So that's
That's
just.
why it's so helpful to watch. Well, I was t telling Michael and Aaron offline, I'm watching The Passion,
Mm,
and I kind of never realized in the Gospel of Mark, even when I just read it, how much Jesus is silent
mm-hmm.
when spoken to.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
he's letting the people that want to persecute him raise all these things against him. He doesn't say anything.
Mm-hmm.
He waits until he gets asked a very direct question, and then
Mm-hmm.
he comes uh, with full force. And
Yeah.
similarly, Pilate asks him questions, and then he just he answers like a very strategic, um, patient, and such
Mm-hmm.
a powerful character. And I didn't feel that power just reading it because it's just like, oh, he was silent. He didn't respond or blah, blah, blah. I read over that stuff. But when you see it in action, you see people play and you see the whole crowd go almost crazy. And then Jesus
Yeah.
being like, um, uh, asking him, "Are you the Son of Man?" I think that was the
Yeah.
question. And he's like, "Yes, and I shall be seated at the right,
Yeah.
seated
Yeah.
at the right hand of the
Exactly.
Father, and coming on the clouds of heaven." And it's
Yeah.
like, We don't care about any witnesses before. This is blasphemy. Get him out of here.
Well, I think like I have a couple things about that because I know you want to do the Egyptian thing, but this is
No,
just
no,
such an
I don't need to do the Egyptian thing. By the way, my cat broke my camera. I'm really upset.
oh really?
Yeah, it's
Oh
broken. Yeah,
no.
so if you're
No.
wondering why I'm distracted,
Oh
she
no.
messed up my lens.
Man, I remember like by the way, just a small aside, like my sister and her boyfriend they got a puppy and now it's like the dog is almost bigger than we are. It's crazy big.
Yeah.
And he's like destroying and breaking everything. But he's a sweet dog, but also he's destroying and breaking everything. So I remember when I heard that Lucas and his wife got a cat, I was like very smart. But now, after all, it seems like
Dude,
Human cat.
she'll be here all day. I'm at work all day, and the moment I come back, she just decides to eat plants and break it. I don't know
You
why.
yeah.
terror.
I think it's anyway.
Anyways, yes. No, okay, wait. So well, two things. So the first thing is that the in the discussion question, he actually alludes to some live performances by people who did it by themselves. Like there's a one-man show by Max McLean, which is also alluded to in the discussion questions. And I watched it entirely, and it's great. Like it's just fantastic. Like this guy, he just learned the whole Gospel of Mark by heart. So he's just like saying the whole thing in 1.5 hours, and he acts it out. He acts out every character, etc. So you do get the sense of someone who is able to say this in a very lively and interesting way, just like might have been the case for those early communities when it might have been read out in their congregations. You know, that, okay, this is more than, like, it doesn't need the embellishments of, let's say, a full-blown movie, for instance. Having said that, I definitely read the Gospels differently now that, for instance, I've watched so much of The Chosen, which is also sad because now, you know, my whole picture of Jesus is like this actor, etc., which is annoying.
That's why you gotta watch The Passion.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
exactly. Like you have to watch so many different things that all of that you know you see beyond it. And this is, by the way, why I love that Lord of the Rings doesn't have this one Christ character, but all of them have aspects of it. So you know, anyways,
A good point.
that's a different discussion. But yeah, I don't know. Nonetheless, like I would just say that it just helps so much because I know certain sentences that I now feel so much more emotion. I kind of feel the emotion of a Jesus figure speaking them, and
Yeah.
sometimes being angry, and sometimes being
Yeah.
very sad, and that's why I want to definitely play out or go through some of the passages because
Get
especially
ready,
those
Michael.
those yeah exactly so exactly Michael, get ready for what's it like that he says something like, do you still not get it? Like that happens very often in the Gospel of Mark, where you still don't get it and you kind of feel that he is honestly a bit sad, like you don't get it yet. And similarly, obviously, when he realizes that like it's going to be his death and that he wants the disciples to stay awake with him and they fall asleep, and like there's just this loneliness too that says more about his internal state that now I'm able to read into it. But I do nonetheless agree
Well,
with what you said.
yeah, I want to do that definitely. But I want to, before that, I want to kind of just double click on the silence aspect,
Yeah.
because I think what little he does say right before his death, I think, is really telling, actually, of what his internal state is. Because he says, you know, crying out, it says crying out, like, my God, why have you forsaken me? And people kind of use that as kind of an example, a shining example, like, of his humanity, like peering through. And then a little bit later in that section, they say, like, Jesus saw how he died, he said, but then at least in the New International Version, there's like a whatever you call it, like a footnote that says, some manuscripts saw that he died with such a cry is mentioned. And so there's this like crying out of emotion of, you know, you can imagine sadness, despair, just like the sheer pain of it all. And I mean, I know we don't have like time to like, delve into it. But I've always wondered about the my God, why have you forsaken me?" Line. Like, is
Hmm.
because we were talking earlier about, him kind of having this like pre predestined fate, knowing what his like eventual resurrection and kind of arc, if you will be. But then in that moment, it's like, is he expressing doubt about that?
Yeah.
Or at least like, it's like, what do you make of that? Like, if you're just kind of so rested
Hmm.
and comfortable in what God is, the trial that God is putting you through for your eventual
Yeah.
resurrection, why would you say that, at that moment? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because that line is in every gospel, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
think so. I think so. I'm actually
yeah.
Back to your question, Aaron, of did he know? Um, in the Passion, there's a really good scene, I think right at the start actually, where
nice.
you really see Jesus kind of panicking, which I don't know if that actually happened, but
Okay.
you really see fear, like he's trying to make sense of it. He's really trying to speak to God, like, what's going on? Please,
Yeah.
show me. And he's it's in the middle of the night and Peter's there. This is actually the scene in the Gospel of Mark, somewhere at the start, where he gets upset with Peter for sleeping.
Hmm.
You remember
Yeah.
that they start the Passion with, and you see Jesus. He's just praying intensely, and he's really trying to. And and I think that a
Hmm.
similar part of that you see in exactly the scene you're describing, Michael, where there's this. I don't know if it's doubt. Well, in many ways, it's radical doubt. Why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
I kind of go through it as I'm watching, as I'm reading, as I'm rehearsing the story in my head, as I'm going to church. I think it's a similar doubt that I think a lot of people, Christians, deal with.
Yeah, but that's obviously why it's so crazy that Jesus himself says it.
Jesus would say it.
Exactly, like
Yeah.
reflecting kind of the journeys of faith that people go through all the time, where it's like, I want to say that I believe, but can I really say that about myself?
Yeah,
Mm.
I think there's a couple things which are relevant. So first of all, that what he's saying, it's by the way interesting that like he says it and people think he's calling Elijah because he says Eloi, Eloi, right? Like my God, why have you forsaken me? And they're like, oh, is he saying Elijah, Elijah? But no, he's saying Eloi, Eloi. So that's funny that people around him don't hear it well. It's also noteworthy to say that that's a psalm. It's Psalm 22,
Uh-huh.
verse 1. It's that line, my God, why have you forsaken me? So it might have been that he felt it, but he also, like, he's looking for language to express what is going through him. And he's going for that psalm. So I think that's noteworthy. And then finally, Zizek makes a big deal out of this. Like, Zizek's whole idea of being a Christian atheist is that he believes that Christianity is the only religion in which you can truly be an atheist because that's the only religion in which God himself becomes an atheist, which is Jesus on the cross saying at some point, God, why have you forsaken me? And realizing nihilism. And he takes that, by the way, from a sentence in G.K. Chesterton, who talks about it. So, like, I just think like there's so much here going on, but I totally agree with you that it is fascinating to realize that he has become fully human because he has suffered truly, and indeed he's not just saying like it's almost like as he's nearing his end. Also, indeed, with the praying on the mountain, that he's realizing like, wait, this actually requires and demands suffering of me. And I sometimes think about, well, first of all, I think about the book of Job,
Yeah.
that like it's like indeed God has become man now because he wants to go through the suffering that he made Job essentially, or he allowed Job to go through, um, and he really feels that here. Well, and similarly, he I also think about Abram sacrificing Isaac, and that God at the end is like, wait, I can't, like, no, stop, don't do this. Like, I believe you, and that he realized like, I'll I'm the one who should offer my own son. I shouldn't demand of you to, let's say,
Oh, yeah.
sacrifice your son. So like
Mm.
there's all these parallels at least that I feel to the Old Testament, which are also so relevant and are beautiful here, and that's also why I like that it's a psalm. and I don't quite know what to make of it. But that's like, it bursts apart. Like there's all these associations that all feel relevant in some ways,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I took a Bible and poetry class earlier this year, and I think it's called a type, like something that refers, that's basically like a symbol. Well,
Like a
I think,
typology. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, he broke it. I think symbol and allegory are different definitionally, but yeah, that type, and it's kind of mind breaking because it's like all those things from the Old Testament refer back to Jesus, but it's like at the same time, what Jesus goes through also refers back to all these other examples. Like it's like this kind of circular thing. And yeah, it just made me think like it's almost like he had to have said that for the totality of the Christian story to like make sense. And because in insofar as the story arc of Christ kind of mirrors what happens in the world, which I believe it does. Like I believe that's like constantly being repeated. It's not just like this thing that happened 2,000 years ago. It's like that that kind of the fall, resurrection, redemption story is like playing out in all of our lives. Like he had to have shown the pain that he was in for us to be able to
Otherwise, it wasn't
believe
suffering,
in.
right?
Otherwise, it wasn't suffering.
Great point.
And I want to hear the whole of like Zizek's argument, but it's like I feel like I don't know. It's like he kind of just decided to bracket out like literally the next like chapter heading, which says Jesus has risen, and he's like, all right, I'm just gonna take the like suffering Jesus to like
I agree.
Yeah, it's like I don't know how like how great of an argument that is, but
no, I'm not a Shizekian, by the way. I just think it's funny.
Yeah, no, it is funny and it's interesting because I've never really understood what the term Christian atheist means, so that kind of gives I guess new light to it. But I don't want to keep banging this drum if we want to get into some reading, but
we're reading as well, my guys.
Yeah, I have some passages.
Oh, here I go again. I'm still on the stream.
It's fine because no one is watching.
Dude, guys. Okay.
Yeah, I guess it is a Monday morning for just most Americans. Like we just have to work.
Yeah, okay. I'm just gonna click this away. What are you reading?
Yeah, like so I'm just looking. Are there some aspects that we're forgetting? Like surely, like I remember, by the way, talking to my dad, like, and he said something like, "Oh yeah, I really enjoyed the discussion." He was like, "But it's funny because for him, like, there's all these elements that have to do with controversial decision he makes in comparison to other theologians, and he does talk about them. But for us, it's just like, yeah, makes sense, cool. We don't really discuss many things that for him, like, obviously matter a great deal. So I just want to make us aware of that, but that's fine. I also like there's aspects here, like obviously it's missing the Christmas story. There's no sense of him being born of a virgin birth. And it's funny that indeed, like, I love that passage where, like, they're just annoyed by him when he comes back to his hometown. They're like, who do you think you are, dude? Grow up. Like, come on. Like, weren't you, like, a carpenter? Like, aren't you the brother of James, etc.? Like, what are you talking about?
Imagine being Jesus' brother.
Yeah. Well, we're going to learn much more about Jesus' brother, James. So, yeah, that should be interesting. Anyways, I think it would be good to do some reading and also then to reflect more about these questions that we've introduced. So what is the experience? Is the Gospel of Mark a way of getting to the to the experiences of the disciples or of Jesus himself? One aspect there, by the way, like I do think there are some passages, like for instance when the woman approaches him who says like, okay, please save my sick child, but she's a Gentile, she is Greek, she's not Jewish, and that he says like, well, no, the children should eat, and it would be impolite to give food to the dogs, like almost like this, like, who do you think you are? You're not Jewish, right? Like, why would I give food to the dogs? Like, I'll give food to my own children, to my people. And then she says like, yeah, but don't you think that the dog should eat the crumbs of the food that belongs to the children? And then he says like, wow, you got it. Your child is saved. Your child is cured. And there's two possibilities there, which I've also been discussing with her dad. And that on the one hand, you could say that he is like, well, good on you. You realized it. And now you see sort of, the hierarchy of, like, say, I'm here first for the Jewish people, then I'm here for other people. And you take the humble stance of like, yeah, but can I at least have the crumbs? Because, all you need is a mustard seed. Like, I don't need much more. And she realized that's enough. And that's her faith. And she is secured by her faith. But I think what my dad finds more interesting, and that possibly around here, I think it's a later passage, that Jesus himself is a little bit moved and changed. And he's like, wait, am I a savior to other peoples too? Not just to the Jewish peoples. And that happened halfway through the gospel. And that's a possibility, that Jesus finds that out. So that's something that we can talk about.
That's cool.
Just mentioning it as a few considerations that we can look at. And one more thing, the whole thing about the what do you call it? Like the sower who went out to seed, and then like some of them falling on fertile ground, etc. And it's interesting that that the apostles don't understand what he's talking about, so they go up to him and say like, "Can you please explain?" And he's just annoyed again, like, "Oh my God, you still do not understand." But then he says, like how it's often interpreted. Bart Ehrman also makes a big deal out of this. He says like, well, I put it into like story form so that common people understand. But if you look very precisely at what he says like, no, I say it in story form so that people may not understand. Which is very interesting. It's like, because like there is this way in which Jesus is constantly also saying like, shh, don't tell anyone. So Jesus is a secret. And that's why there's this whole book that is written about it that Bart Ehrman also loves. It's like the secret Messiah, that he is all like, like you don't tell anyone. And that's why it's ironic that at the end when they're supposed to tell him that they don't want to tell anyone. I'm going to try to find it, the parable of the sower.
Exciting stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think there's so many things here that we
I'm into it.
Yeah.
Look at.
That was like my favorite parable of the gospel. So if we read that one,
guys, we're accomplishing stuff. It's coming so alive for me at the moment.
That's
amazing.
Good. That's good. That's
never
good.
been more alive.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm trying to find where he said it. But anyways, like I'll probably get back to it later. So I'm not sure if I have that passage. Can I share my screen and then?
Yeah, let me give you some permission.
Give me a permission.
Take some heat off.
Is it where he says? Is it where he says, "Don't you understand this parable? How then will you understand any parable?"
Yeah. So I think so. Let me check.
Let me make you.
Oh no! I
wait, Aaron. You have to just. Sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
No, sorry. No. We'll probably read this. So I
Dude,
don't
Aaron,
need to read it before.
Ask to share your screen.
Getting excited.
Oh wait, should I ask?
You need to ask me,
okay.
and then I can give you permission. I don't know how to do it otherwise.
Yeah. Share, verzoek zenden. Yes.
Yeah,
so I just.
All right.
Okay, so share, and then you should now. I can either do it this way, then you see you see us too. I'm not sure if this works.
That'll be best.
So.
That's good.
Is this good?
I like it. Michael, agreed? Ooh, this is the Play-Doh font.
Yeah, the Play-Doh font. Yeah, it's very, very similar.
Marcellus. It looks like
Marcellus. I do have some. I don't think I actually...
Oh, I love this.
I don't think I actually... Yeah, I'll send it to you. I'm not sure if I have that one. So this is the parable of the sower, and then of the mustard seed, and then of the growing seed. And I'm not sure where, but we might get to it, but I'm not sure if I actually highlighted it. So we can at least, I started off with Jesus Calms the Storm, which I think is just a very famous story.
I love this.
Is it okay if I narrate and then Michael, you can be Jesus, and then Lucas, you are the disciples, so blue?
Yes. Let's
do this. And we'll
Okay.
just do a couple of these. So whenever you see your color, so Lucas, you're blue, Michael, you're green, you speak.
I'm so delighted by this.
Okay.
Okay.
To the two viewers listening, I can't stress this enough. We're going in raw.
You
Yes,
guys are
Who
so
knows?
we
lucky.
are going in raw.
Whoever's listening, you're the luckiest person alive.
And if you feel uncomfortable being emotional when it might be clear that the individual is emotional, then at least try to feel what they felt so that we can talk about it afterwards and get a little discussion on what if there's character development, what is going through them. Okay. That day, so this is Mark 4, verse 35, New International Version. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples,
Let us go over to the other side.
Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him,
Teacher, don't you care if we drown?
He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves,
Quiet, be still.
Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples,
Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?
They were terrified and asked each other,
Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.
Cool. Should I go on to the next one, or do we want to discuss this already?
Next.
Okay. Sure. I have more. Let's see. Okay, yes.
Oh, the Satan one. Let's go.
Yeah, we'll get there. Okay. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf they had with them in the boat.
Be careful.
Jesus warned them.
Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod.
They discussed this with one another and said,
It is because we have no bread.
Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them,
Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see, and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?
12.
They replied,
And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?
They answered.
7.
He said to them,
Do you still not understand?
Okay, we go on a little
This is
bit
fun.
farther. Yeah, this is fun. So now we have Jesus heals a blind man at Bethsaida. And then I thought it was interesting to go through a passage where you have more words from Peter, because I want to talk about his. Obviously, if his let's say student or associate wrote this down, then I think we might get some insight into Peter's experience. Okay. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them.
Who do people say I am?
They replied,
Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets.
But what about you?
He asked.
Who do you say I am?
Peter answered.
You are the Messiah.
Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. He then began to teach them that
the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law,
and that he must be
killed and after 3 days rise again.
He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter.
Get behind me, Satan,
he said.
You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns.
Okay.
Dude, no lines for me?
Yeah, sorry, there's no lines for you
What
here.
the hell?
Like, I guess Peter began
man.
to rebuke him. There's
Peter's
also
just like, dude,
lots of lines
You
here.
gotta,
for
you
my-
gotta,
sitting
act, you gotta
down.
act it out. You gotta act it out.
Alright,
Lucas.
alright.
Yeah,
Read between the
exactly.
lines.
Rebuke him. So
Rebuke me through the
I
screen.
only have these words here, but they're like kind of buried because it's kind of weird to mark it. But just so you know, I'll say these. Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said,
Those who would be my disciples must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, but those who lose their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for you to gain the whole world, yet forfeit your soul? Or what can you give in exchange for your soul? If any of you are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of you when he comes in his Father's glory, the holy angels.
And he said to them,
Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come with power.
Yeah, okay, so I always think that passage is like beautiful and terrifying, by the way. Like, and you also see that there's already apocalypticism, like that we're gonna discuss all the way at the end of this trajectory when we're gonna read the book of Revelation. But you see that's already present, at least in what they at least ascribe to what Jesus should have said or would have said. Okay.
Here we go.
So we have more. Yes, we have more for you, Lucas.
Thank you.
Okay. So Jesus heals a demon-possessed boy. And by the way, like, I want to hear from you what this is like to read it from their perspective, okay?
Mm-hmm.
What's it like to be Jesus?
Yeah, exactly. We'll get to it. We'll get to it. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him.
What are you arguing with them about?
He asked. A man in the crowd answered,
Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not.
You unbelieving generation.
Jesus replied,
How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me.
So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father,
How long has he been like this?
From childhood.
He answered,
It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us.
If you can,
said Jesus.
Everything is possible for one who believes.
Immediately, the boy's father exclaimed,
I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief.
When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the evil spirit.
You deaf and mute spirit,
he said,
I command you, come out of him and never enter him again.
The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said,
He's dead.
But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately,
Why couldn't we drive it out?
He replied, This kind can come out only by prayer.
They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them,
The Son of Man is going to be delivered over to human hands. He will be killed, and after 3 days he will rise.
But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. Which I understand, by the way, at this point. Like, he seems so pissed off all the time.
Wait, can you go back 1 second?
Unbelieving generation.
Yes, exactly.
Dude, I have such a funny clip of this kid in like a TV show.
Uh-huh.
And I just see that kid. It's like, you unbelieving adulterous. And it's like people being upset that this kid is so brainwashed by his parents or whatever, but it's the funniest.
It's similar. That's nice.
It's exactly those texts, so it ruins it for me a little bit.
There's also,
But I'm not gonna link it.
There's also this famous clip of this very young black girl was like, "We don't want no devils in this house," you know, and that's the one that Kanye sampled that you could hear at the start of his Life
I
Pablo
think I know
album.
this clip.
Yeah.
We want the Lord.
Yeah, we want the Lord. Yeah, exactly. Just amazing. So good. Okay. Anyways, Should we go on, or do you want to reflect a little bit?
No. Reflecting will kill it for me.
Let's reflect. Let's reflect.
Okay, let's
Okay.
go. I listen to Jesus,
Oh.
man. I'm not.
Yeah, but I'll show you at least how much I have, right?
A lot
Like,
to
and
reflect
then
on.
so we have this, which is,
Yeah.
by the way, I love the request of James and John. Like, I think it's so funny and so sad at the same time.
Yeah.
Because you
Okay,
can really
let's
see.
actually work through that. Maybe
Then,
at
then
least
we have
work
the
through
pull
that
text
section.
to Caesar, and then we have Peter's denial and what
Oh,
happens
yes.
Not a
there.
lot of blue.
And I think that and I think that's we can switch if you
But
want.
what blue there is
No.
Yeah.
is important.
Okay. Anyways, okay. So do we start off? Oh yeah,
Yeah. Let's
Where
go.
did we end now?
yeah. So I think we are. Yeah. So this is about the parable of the rich man,
Oh, sorry
like
for
who
the
said like
confusion.
like the rich person said like, yo, no, I want to follow you. And he's like, oh, just give away your possession. That's the last thing you have to do. And then he's like, no, I don't want to. And then it was sad. And then now we reflect on it. Jesus looked around and said to his disciples.
How hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God.
The disciples were amazed at his words. But Jesus said again,
Children, how hard it is to enter the kingdom of God. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for the rich to enter the kingdom of God.
the disciples were even more amazed and said to each other,
Who then can be saved?
Jesus looked at them and said,
Humanly, this is impossible, but not with God. All things are possible with God.
Then Peter spoke up.
We have left everything to follow you.
Truly, I tell you,
Jesus replied,
no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age. Homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields, along with persecutions, and in the age to come eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last first.
They were on their way up to Jerusalem, with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 aside, and he told them what was going to happen to him.
We are going up to Jerusalem,
He said,
and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise.
Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him.
Teacher,
They said,
we want you to do for us whatever we ask.
which is also a bold proposal. Do for us whatever we ask. Sorry. Yes, go ahead.
What do you want me to do for you?
He asked. They replied,
Let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your glory.
You don't know what you are asking.
Jesus said,
Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?
We can.
Tongue twister.
They answered. Jesus said to them,
You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have prepared.
Yeah, have been prepared. And then when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John, I imagine. You have like 12 disciples and 2 of them go up to him and just been like,
Yeah.
oh, by the way, can we sit on you? Anyway.
Grant us
Yeah.
any wish we
Yeah,
want.
yes. Jesus
It's
called
like a
them.
genie.
Yes, exactly. Jesus called them together and said,
You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.
Okay, so there's I have more again, but I think this is already a lot. If I go all the way back to the start, we started off at the storm, so that might be interesting. So keep that in mind. What was your experience reading it from that perspective in the storm? And then what was it like? Bless you. Yeah, that's my wife. And then what was it like when they were on a boat again? But it was about, oh no, we only have one loaf of bread left, and Jesus like, oh my God, I just multiplied bread so much. So are you stupid? And then we have Peter declaring that Jesus is Messiah, but then shortly after that, get behind me, Satan. So Peter must have felt that too.
I felt it.
Yeah, so I'm curious about that. Then he says a bunch of stuff, very prophetic, very intense. Then he heals the boy, in which Lucas was not just the disciples, but also the father of the boy. And again, he predicts his death a second time. And they couldn't drive it out. Only Jesus could drive it out, which is also interesting. And then now we are at the point where we were just at, which is indeed him predicting his death a third time, and also commenting on the difficulty of, getting through the kingdom of God through riches. And then the request of two of his disciples, which must just be astonishing to him at this point, that after all that, they're still requesting these things. So maybe, Lucas, you want to start because you had less text?
No, I'm committing completely to the blue, and I'm not going to change.
No. But I think maybe you want to start with your reflection. Yeah, reflection. What went through you? What was your experience reading it?
Absolute.
Yeah. Frustration?
No, it's a joke because of the lack of lines.
Yeah.
What went through me reading it?
What was your experience?
Well, as I was saying, it's never been more alive for me. It's very exciting stuff for me to go through this, and to go through different mediums and methods to kind of make Jesus more alive for me. And not just more alive, I think more than anything is more human, more concrete. Jesus has been very alive for me in other ways, but more as this ideal that I just bowed down to. And this feels more like a horizontal encounter.
Yeah.
An encounter that shows his humanity, but also his divinity, in terms of he clearly has a divine understanding, but he deals with frustrations as well. Like, why don't you get it yet? Or like, you don't know what you're asking, or yeah, that's human in many ways. So I think that's what's going through me.
And do you feel, let's say, as a disciple, do you feel like, let's say, if you just imagine you being in their position, do you feel like you are getting some of it, or do you feel like everything is just so mysterious and we have no clue, and why are you drawn to it? So
it's so interesting because this was really going through me yesterday, when I was watching The Passion and The Chosen as well, but seeing the disciples, seeing Peter deny him, of course, reflects the fact that they are human and their faith is limited in many ways. I think they must have had a lot of faith and trust in him, but the closer you get to that persecution, to the death, to the it's easy to be a follower of Jesus when he's not being persecuted and like hated and he's about to be crucified. I'm starting to feel the shaking of the foundations of the trust that the disciples have in Jesus, or that the disciples have in their own faith of Jesus.
Yeah,
that's what I'm starting to feel. I feel their absolute awe and amazement with them, but I also feel them being completely confronted by their own mortality and lack of belief, lack of faith, lack of trust. That is so human. That I feel.
Yeah, and one thing about that, and then I want to get to Jesus's experience, or let's say Michael's experience, I should probably say, as Jesus, which is right before he was arrested, and we're gonna get to this.
Did
so
you
I
just
don't.
outline Peter in blue?
Yeah, because I wanted to point to when Peter was there, so you don't have to say the word Peter, but then at least you know that we are aware where. Okay, yeah, because obviously, like you have zero lines here, so this is a bit sad.
That makes it so much worse.
Yeah,
Even when he's referred to, you gotta
yeah,
give him
It's gotta
a
be
bone.
there.
yeah. You could say
Said
your own
two.
name if you really like. But I think we'll get to this point. But just one thing already, it's just interesting that this was the passage, like very, what was it again? Oh no, like I'm looking at, like for Judas. Yeah, so Judas Iscariot, like it's already mentioned at the start, who betrayed him. So it's
Oh,
like
dude,
coming
you
up.
should watch The Passion just for the Judas performance. It's crazy.
Dude, you're not even at the point in The Chosen where you're watching Judas.
Judas, he gets so the demons are all around him. They're all
Yeah,
over him.
but at
They're
the same
they're
time,
gnawing
there's
at him.
something in Judas that I think it's the oil passion. So like where what was it again? Like where the woman comes to him and she starts she
Yeah,
starts putting oil, placing oil on him and trying
yeah.
to find what the right chapter is. But at least like it's clear that also there the disciples are like, what do you do like this, like what are you doing, because this is like you could sell it and give it to the poor, like that
Yeah,
seems like your.
he took the whole thing.
Yeah, and then he says like, what, like the poor will be there forever, I will be gone soon, he responds.
Mm.
And it's almost like, and I think this even so in the later gospels, that they say that the disciple who got particularly annoyed with this is Judas. And it's not here, but it is juxtaposed directly with Judas going on to betray him. So it's almost like Judas has this positive ideal for what he wants. Like Judas is basically like a communist, right? He wants Jesus to be like, okay, to be the revolutionary who overthrows the Roman Empire and then gives out, money to the poor, and therefore, like everyone is saved. And he is like frustrated by that Jesus just doesn't fulfill that idea exactly, and that's why he betrays him. That's at least one hypothesis, which is kind of interesting. But anyways, sorry, we can get to that later.
Yeah,
Jesus,
no worries.
I mean, Michael, what was your experience?
Well, actually, if you wouldn't mind just scrolling up to the Jesus heals a demon possessed boy, because that was kind of a moment for me where I had this um kind of shift in perception of like how I'm playing him. Like
Yeah.
I think before that I was playing him as this kind of like father figure who's kind of pissed off at his kids for continuing to repeat the same mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this kind of frustration, but it then kind of like the frustration almost like elevates the father even more from and like distances himself
Mm-hmm.
more from the children, because there's kind of um if I can say like a lack of empathy for like why the children keep stumbling, right?
Yeah.
But then when I got to this part and when I said, how long has he been like this? And I was kind of still like, having this tone of kind of just like almost like kind of dejected frustration. But I had this realization. I was like, it's like I was picturing him as like a doctor and,
Mm-hmm.
this like sick person coming in and like the doctor who has like care and compassion and like bedside manner and like, inquire. I mean, he asks like, I don't think it's part of the highlighted section here. But doesn't he like ask him what his name is at some point? Um,
Mm.
or I'm looking in the NIV version. Anyways,
Yeah, it
he's
is the
like,
NIV, but yeah. Anyways,
yeah.
go on. Yeah.
But he's like inquiring about this boy's condition, and I was like, that it just felt wrong to play that with that same tone.
Yeah.
So
I
all
see.
that to say, I think I was kind of conflicted a little bit of like how to play him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting from Lucas's perspective, he felt like this was like an entryway into the human side of Jesus with these kind of um frustrations over a seeming like lack of understanding about who he was and what he was doing, and kind of the repeating of the same patterns. When I was playing him, I guess there was a sense of that, but I also felt quite distanced from Lucas's characters.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah, like at the end with James, was it James and John who
Yeah.
come and ask to be seated at the left and right hand? It just reminds me of like I can't think of a specific example. Oh, you know what? Have you both seen Harry Potter?
Yeah.
Yeah. Many
It
times.
kind of reminded me of like Peter Pettigrew and Voldemort,
Oh yeah.
where like Peter Pettigrew is kind of like he's this I mean he's this like epitome of a servant, but he's also kind of clueless about like how to actually serve Voldemort, and like whatever he does is like wrong, and then when he like betrays him and Voldemort finds that out when he like gets turned into the rat, like he like he's um but it's kind of like the like epitome of this like humble servant who doesn't know how to serve, and they
Yep.
think like, oh, if I just like jump into the fire with you, my lord, like that's like me honoring you. And Jesus is kind of like, no, like that's not the way.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
again, it just feels like this like father and child thing. And
Similar with Peter,
on
right? Like that he's like,
yeah,
oh yeah, no, that's not gonna happen. Like we're gonna protect you, and he's just like, get behind me, Satan, which is just like
yeah,
so
yeah,
intense.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to I felt like I guess I felt more compassion for the disciples
Yeah.
than maybe I even did for Jesus in
I understand.
that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Like on the one hand, like they're clueless and stupid, like that they ask this, which is just ridiculous. But at the same time, you know, like I'm trying to figure out because like they also seem to have loved him, right? Like so there's this,
Hmm.
and by the way, like one thing that we haven't even discussed is that all the way at the end, and this is why this uh, you'll see them much earlier on in the Chosen. Like we're learning about the 12 disciples, and I. But at the end, like when he appears, what was it again? This was the death of Jesus, and there you get some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. So that means that all this time there were also female followers along, but we just don't hear about
Hmm.
them. But we hear about them like at the end that they were along for the ride all this time.
Hmm.
So I think that's also something to keep in mind that like this wasn't, let's say, well, I mean, obviously it's Jesus, so it can be, but like this wasn't, let's say, a toxic masculine type of environment where it
Totally.
was like, where it was just like, yeah, Jesus kind of like a mafia boss, like who was bossing everyone around. Like it seems like they had a really close community of people who loved each other, and at the same time, I totally agree with you that it seems sometimes a little bit off-putting and alienating, which I also love, by the way, that whenever I read about it, that I have this image which is always challenged by what I read about it.
Yeah.
It's never simplified into this one view because he
Yeah.
also does seem to be so concerned about the genuine suffering and that he wants to serve, etc. So, yeah, just moved by it.
Yeah. And I think this is kind of more of like a meta commentary on like the whole I guess like all the characters, but he's also trying to prepare his disciples for what he's instructing them to do after he resurrects, which is to tell the world about him. And
Hmm.
so like the stakes could not be higher. And
Yeah.
it's like a coach trying to prepare his players for like the most existentially meaningful game of Lucas is playing football in 40 minutes. It's
Oh
like
yeah.
if you lose this game, it's like the world will end.
Yeah.
And like the players can't get in line. And but it's also like I'm trying to just place myself in like what the disciples are feeling.
Hmm.
And it's like they are being encountered with, I don't know, maybe people will think I'm heretical or something for saying this, but it's like they're like being encountered with this otherworldly magic that they have never experienced before, that like defies all, like physical material reality. And they're basically being asked in like the spur of the moment to like completely just like understand that
Yeah.
and like how it works. Like I was just thinking like it must be how when Galileo was trying to convince people that the sun was the center of the galaxy and not the earth, and people were
Yeah.
just like, how does that even compute?
Yeah.
That makes no sense. And he gets burned at the stake for it. And it's obviously not a one-to-one comparison,
No,
but
but
it's
I
like
see what you mean.
it's like trying to get people to like completely, it's not just like, oh, like actually 2 + 2 = 5 and not 4. It's like your whole understanding of how math and numbers like
Yeah.
operate is like being asked to shift.
So I would say, like, for me, okay, this is gonna sound very strange and perhaps heretical, but for me, I was reminded of first encountering Jonathan Peugeot. That when I listened to him, I was just like, I honestly don't understand a single thing of what he's saying, and at the same time, I don't know, he's pulling me in. Like, I don't know, like there's something about it that makes me want to keep listening, and
Yeah.
and it sounds like it all makes sense, but I just don't have a clue what he's talking about. And as I kept listening, like he started sort of reframing and sort of reforming my entire view of which I watch the world, and that's also not a one-on-one comparison, but I think that's the reason why I draw that analogy is because like there's also something that they feel pulled to in Jesus, but they don't know what exactly. Like they're obviously fascinated by the miracles, but it's not just like there's something about that like that they find fascinating, but they just can't comprehend it yet.
They can't comprehend that they do comprehend. Like they comprehend that someone else knows something they know that they want to know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And that's what I had with Peugeot as well, where you're like, I know you're kind of right. You sound more right than
yeah.
than many people I've ever heard in my life, but I really don't understand why. And then
Yeah.
you just
Sorry, Luke. Lucas. I might have been distracting you because there were so much blue lines here that you were like, "Wait, what?"
let's
Like, let's
go,
go.
dude. Go.
Like, but you'll probably also need to leave soon, so I don't wanna.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not even
Could,
gonna be
could,
involved in the last line, so let's do this one. You guys keep talking. I'll put my clothes on, and you can go for a little bit longer. Go ahead.
Yeah, like, that sounds good because like the one thing that I do sort of wanna. Well, okay, I want to mention a few things. So first of all, that is indeed the tragedy of the Peter figure, like who also indeed like becomes so, yeah, I don't know, like so emotional, right, and that he rejects him, which we might not have time to discuss. And then secondly, sort of an aspect that I find interesting and that I just want you to pay attention to because it's going to return. Like that's the Transfiguration, which we didn't really talk about. But when he's up on the mountain with Moses and Elijah, and there's this exclamation that, you know, this is the Son of God, like coming down from God, said to the disciples.
Yeah.
And I just once heard a theory about it that I actually love, that I just that I just want to, I don't know, I find it so wondrous.
Yeah. Go
So,
ahead.
and that is that there's all these discussions on, you know, like is Christ really God, or is it like what is he exactly? Does he even claim to be God, etc.? But if you think about the fact that if you read through the whole Old Testament, there's 2 prophets who supposedly saw God while going up a mountain. One of them was Moses, one of them was Elijah. And it's just like there's this moment that like they went up a mountain, time collapsed, and they saw Jesus. So like what we're seeing is we're going back into time, and now we see sort of Moses looking at the back of God,
That's
which is
amazing.
Jesus, and then Elijah also seeing him, and that's sort of what. So it's like this weird sort of ayahuasca type experience of time
amazing.
collapsing, which I don't know if it's true. I don't know, but
It's
like
true.
I just thought it was such a beautiful and interesting way of looking at what happens here and why sort of Elijah and Moses were both
I
so
love
relevant.
that.
Yeah. So that's just one thing that I wanted to share, and now we can go on
Thank you.
reading.
That is amazing.
I love that.
Yeah. Not sure if we could do anything with it. Okay. Later, so this is about paying the poll tax to Caesar. Later they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said,
Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the poll tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we?
But Jesus knew their hypocrisy.
Why are you trying to trap me?
He asked.
Bring me a denarius and let me look at it.
They brought the coin, and he asked them,
Whose portrait is this? And whose inscription?
Caesar's.
They replied. Then Jesus said to them,
Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's.
And they were amazed at him. So not exactly the disciples. And now we get obviously more into the story. Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
You will all fall away.
Jesus told them.
For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee.
Peter declared,
Even if all fall away, I will not.
Truly I tell you,
Jesus answered,
today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times.
But Peter insisted emphatically,
Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you.
and all the others said the same. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples,
Sit here while I pray.
He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled.
My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death.
He said to them.
Stay here and keep watch.
Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, this hour might pass from him.
Abba, Father,
He said,
everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will.
Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping.
Simon,
He said to Peter,
are you asleep? Could you not keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the 3rd time, he said to them,
Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough! The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise! Let us go! Here comes my betrayer.
It's almost like a play, right? And then indeed we get the very... I don't think we should go into this, but Judas betraying him. And this is interesting, but I want to focus on the point where Peter is relevant. Peter followed him at a distance after he was betrayed, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. And then the high priest asked, are you the Messiah? He says, I am, etc., etc. And then we go to this section, which, Lucas, you might still have time for to read this. Well, actually, we should say, we should start here. So the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?
I am,
said Jesus.
and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven.
The high priest tore his clothes. Why do we need any more witnesses? He asked. You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, Prophecy! And the guards took him and beat him. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. You also were with the Nazarene Jesus, she said. You also were with the Nazarene Jesus, she said. But he denied it.
I don't know or understand what you're talking about,
he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, This fellow is one of them. Again he denied it. After a little while, those standing near to Peter, "Surely you are one of them. You are a Galilean." He began to call down curses, and he swore to them.
"I don't know this man you're talking about."
Immediately the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken to him.
Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times.
And he broke down and wept. I always find that so touching.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know, there's something just like, so I'm just touched by this gospel being written by someone who heard this all from Peter. And you'd expect Peter to come out as the hero of the story then. But Peter is shown as like, who is constantly like, okay, yes, like Jesus is positive about him and he gives him the name Peter as opposed to Simon, etc. So like there's also things that are praiseworthy in Peter, but he messes up apparently so many times in the eyes of Jesus. So I just find that beautiful, and that's what he shared with his follower, and that's what we see in the gospel. And those are perhaps, now that we're finishing up, also some of my final thoughts about the Gospel of Mark, and I'm happy we got this context with it and get some, let's say, I don't know, not book smart, but street smart kind of understandings of it with the
Street
fisher
smart.
tales, etc.
Get with it, Verveki.
Yeah, more reflection from you, because like we didn't reflect on your experiences now reading this as we finish up slowly.
Talking to Michael or talking to me?
Well, Lucas, you start first. So what was this like for you being Peter and perhaps other blue lines?
Underwhelming. No, Peter was good. Yesterday I watched The Passion. Did you know?
Yeah, well, I know.
And Peter is rough to see him as a character, because you also only see the last 12 hours, so you really see him at his worst. And so going through this scene again, that image comes to mind. He's weeping after he denies them in the movie. He kneels down to, I'm not sure, the other one disciple and another woman, maybe Mary Magdalene. He kneels down to them and they're trying to comfort him, but he's just weeping and crying and cannot believe what he just did. So yeah, that Peter is going through me for sure.
Yeah.
It's like, of course you believe Jesus when he says you're going to betray me. Like, you have to believe in it at some level. And of course, being Jesus, you have to kind of believe that you're going to die and you're going to go through the worst hell. But it's hard to really believe it until it actually happens. And I think Peter reflects that in his just disbelief and his emotional state that he's in. So it's incredible. All right.
You, Michael?
it's how was it like to play? Yeah, I was honestly focusing so much on the Peter part of it that I may not have that many interesting things to say about
No,
how it
that's
was to
okay.
play
That's
Jesus,
okay.
but it's this kind of, it's this like tragedy of not being able to escape your fate. You know, Peter being like, no, I'm not going to betray. Like, I would die for you, and I would still not disown you. And then just like the rooster crowing and him just having that realization of like, oh, I actually just did the very thing that Jesus said I would. And yeah, it's like being caught in that loop and not being able to get out of it. Is, yeah, there's a lot of tragedy in that, but obviously, you know, we all know like how it eventually ends for Peter. But yeah, it's just playing Jesus at that time, like thinking about, you know, just I think just like the disappointment is like the thing that I would say is like the key emotion in that, especially in that scene with Peter. I mean, there's like, on one hand, it's like he knows that it's going to happen, so like, you know, maybe like the disappointment isn't as intense as if, like, you know, he pledged faith in someone and then they kind of like, you know, stab him in his back like unexpectedly. But still, it's like this feeling of being alone, of like being alone in what he knows and the life of service that he's trying to lead. And just like how clear he is about everything. Like even in the poll tax to Caesar, it's like just like how matter of factly he's like, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God. And like that's that. Like there's nothing is up for debate at that point. But giving to God what is God is clearly a lot more difficult than it seems for all of these people and for all of us today. So yeah, it was, but again, I think just coming back to what I said earlier, I think it's hard to know exactly what tone to strike because because you're conscious of both the godly and the human Jesus. And so like I don't know, it's like do I lean into one or do I somehow try and integrate them together into one, kind of cohesive thing? But it's like how would any of us know what it would feel like to be God? We can only imagine what it's like to be a human. And Jesus is an exceptional human. So it's a challenge to read into his emotional state and to, I guess, push past the part of me, at least, that is like, just stick, it's like all the Bible training you get of like, just stick to what's on the page. Like, don't, read into things that aren't there. Like, don't create meanings that aren't there or whatever. But it's like in this exercise, like we're asked to try and embody those characters. So you kind of have to do that.
Yeah, I understand. That's beautifully said. Yeah, and I also think it is like that's what this was only the first gospel we got through, and it was the shortest one, so there should be plenty more. And just like I also want to admire the author, let's say, and also my dad, but also I mean specifically the author, John Mark, writing this because like he was also dealing with basically everyone is expecting the Messiah, everyone's idea of what the Messiah is going to be like for hundreds of years now, because like there's prophecies around it in the Old Testament, is a warlord who is going to overturn those who oppress the Jewish peoples. So he has the enormous task to show that this individual is Messiah worthy, even though he does not fulfill that does not fit that image, that description at all. So I just find that really interesting that he finds this way to do it, and he ends off indeed with the centurion saying like, well, surely this was indeed a God's son that we looked at. So I just think it's a good start, and I'm looking forward to reading more letters of Paul as they progress to after the first part of this gospel was written, at least if I get that correctly, and reading more of the Gospels and getting a stronger sense of it. And I actually want to check what's next on the schedule. The next one is Fighting for Freedom, and we are reading Galatians and James. So we are not reading... I also need to... I'll finish up soon. Yes, my wife's being called. But we're not reading another gospel for, let's say 6 chapters or something like that for now. And then we're reading Matthew, then Luke and Acts, and then at the end, John. So it's also nice to have read this gospel. Now go back into, let's say, all the letters, the epistles, and then we're going to go back. So I feel this was a very, worthwhile first conversation we had.
Yeah. I thought it was great. I loved the chance to act this stuff out. I feel like it just gives both of us or all of us just an embodied, more alive sense of what it's like, and in line with, I think, Boss's vision for how people read the New Testament in this way. So I had a blast.
Great. Lucas, any final words before we finish off?
Yes. Wait. Absolutely. Really enjoyed it, even though my cat killed my camera. It's a bit upsetting.
Yeah, that's upsetting.
No, I second what you guys said. Mostly what I take with me is it's never been more alive. As I said before, I'm really delighted. I'm in the
Nice.
dark, sorry guys.
Yeah.
I'm like
Ominous.
all over the place. I'm really delighted. And yeah, I'm gonna keep it there because I gotta rush. But it's been really nice, guys.
Sounds
Let's
good.
try to do it again relatively
Yeah.
soon.
We'll plan something in, and then you put it on your channel, and then other people
Yeah.
will know. But let's say
Yeah.
we try probably early January. I'd say. I think before.
I think
Yeah.
that's
Right.
yeah, that's a good idea.
Maybe late December, but I think early January.
Maybe late December.
Yeah, not the 31st, but I mean, you know, like.
Let's try. We'll see.
Well,
We'll
we can.
discuss.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Discuss.
after Christmas. Could
Maybe.
be. Yeah.
Could be.
We'll see. Okay.
All
We'll
right.
communicate
That'd be
that.
timely.
See you
Bye,
guys.
guys.
All right.
Enjoy the video.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See ya.
Peace.
Bye.